Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and I'm excited to talk to all of you. I am as kind of as just introduced, my name is Leza Sheehan. I am a small business owner from the Chicagoland area. And today what we're going to be talking about is exploring the strategic building blocks of brand stories. To give you a little bit of context, I actually have spent the last 25 years in marketing research, and sales within the consumer packaged goods and retail space. And my new consulting practice really is a focus of taking what I've learned working for very large Fortune 500 companies in the space and helping to bring that to life in new and more affordable and accessible ways for small emerging brands, nonprofits, and mid-sized brands. The reason why I wanted to bring to you kind of this story about storytelling is because at the most foundational level, what we do day in and day out as small business owners or those that want to build businesses is tell our stories. Now, we have to tell them in a number of different ways, and we'll get into that as I continue with the webinar. But as you kind of step back and really think about storytelling, storytelling is something that for generations has been the foundation in which we learn and process the world around us, right? Fairy tales and fables, all of that have origins in framing the world around us and providing context. And I'll tell you outright, I actually grew up in South Texas, right around the Mexico border. And I grew up with my grandmother telling all of us kids as a way to, in essence, protect us from what was out at night, not to go out because the lechuza, which is a Mexican fairy kind of fable, would get us if we weren't where we were supposed to be when we were supposed to be there. Now, the reality was there's not really an owl that turns into a witch, I don't think, flying around South Texas that steals small children, but it was a way for my grandmother, without scaring us, to, in essence, ensure that we were aware of our surroundings as little kids. And it's funny because as you talk about it and you think about your own stories, both within your family, when you're talking to friends, right? All of those stories do a number of different things. First and foremost, what they do is they really serve as a way to kind of introduce or educate you, potentially persuade you to do something, or to kind of create a path to kind of better introduce you. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this bar on the top of my screen to disappear, but it's not quite working. But in essence, what you see is quick question before I jump in. Can you see the big screen for sharing on your screen? Is that blocking my slide?
Yeah, there's like a gray
Yeah.
like rectangle.
Okay. I've never had that before. Hold on one second. I'm going to try to reshare one more time, guys. I apologize about that. Let's see if this is any better. Let's try it. Here, I am going to actually read this. Sorry, guys, for the technical difficulties here. I am traveling, and so I don't have my normal setup, and I'm adjusting accordingly. Now we'll go here, and let's see if it simplifies things. Otherwise, we'll go another route. It's still there, isn't it?
No, it's clean
Okay,
now.
awesome. You guys are awesome. Thank you for putting up with me. Now I'm going to jump right in. Look, we are here, as I talked about stories, we're here to talk about your brand stories, your company stories. And there's a number of ways that company stories or brand stories serve us in the business and professional setting. As I said, right, both from a personal side and a professional side, you tell brand stories or company stories as a way to introduce yourself to consumers, to other companies. I'm in the professional services space, and my brand story is very much geared towards the professional services space. You've got people that will use their stories to really educate people on their history or what they stand for, right? If you think about a consumer good, if you're some type of beauty care product or a functional food, you need to explain to people why your food is different. If you're in professional services, you're going to have to explain why your insurance is different or your digital marketing agency is different, right? And those are all elements that can be told in a brand story. The reality is with those brand stories, there's an element of both needing to persuade the end target, the end client or consumer to want to buy, but also to create the need for them to want to buy. And it all comes together. It's really not that complex when you think about it. You're just telling who you are. But at the core of it, the components of that story ultimately lead you to a place where you really do need to get more out of a very simple and straightforward kind of piece of what you're trying to communicate. And that changes depending on what you're trying to communicate to. So, to give you some context, I live in a data-driven brand story world because my company is a marketing research and retail strategy consulting firm. When I'm talking to clients or when I'm talking to others within the space as I network, I tend to do a little research. I use LinkedIn to understand who I'm talking to and what they care about. If you were to do a LinkedIn lookup on me, what you would find out is you'd find different pieces. You might actually find out from my LinkedIn posts that I'm from Texas, in part because every time I go home, I will do store tours and post pictures about my favorite grocery stores and retailers that are based in Texas. You can definitely see on my LinkedIn profile that I went to school at Notre Dame as an undergraduate, and I started my career with General Mills. You'll also see, even in my LinkedIn posts, that I often talk about my family and my family life because that's an element of who I am. I I don't live to work, I work to live. And as a function of that, they are a part of my journey, particularly as a small business owner. My entire family plays a role in helping me to seem bigger than I am. In fact, my 15-year-old daughter helped me to create my white paper in Canva, and I talk about that. Now, the reason that matters is because I'm giving you a piece of my brand story, elements of who I am that when I actually talk to you at a larger and more intentional level will come into play as I formally talk about my brand story. And the reason that matters is because as you think about you and how you would tell your brand story to me, you would tailor what you say in a slightly different way depending on where you were coming from to tap into what you know about me, even if you don't truly know me, right? And we can do this in a number of different ways. If we are actually preparing for a business meeting, you would probably do the research. Who is the person that I'm talking to? What's important to them from a company perspective? What's important to them from a personal perspective? And how can I make my conversation just a little bit more personal? That's the beauty of platforms like social media platforms is we actually are allowing people to know more about us and to customize what we're going to say to them in different ways based on what we know. Someone might actually tie into, oh my God, I see you have teenagers. I'm going through the college prep time too. How's that going for you? And then it creates a personal connection that leads to a more effective business communication. So I actually want to play a game with you, and I'm actually going to pop up the chat and hope it doesn't mess up what you guys see. I actually have gone off a second screen, so I'm depending on somebody to tell me if they do see a screen and it's blocking. But what I'm going to start with is we all know brand stories even if we don't mean to or want to, in part because we are surrounded by them over and over again. So I'm going to start with a game in the chat. We've got a few people here. I'd love for you, I'm going to throw 3 pictures up. And I would absolutely love if you throw in the chat the first thing that comes to mind when you see it. So with the first picture that we're going to look at, When you see this image, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Throw it in the chat, please. Yep. Right? So ultimately, everybody here is tapping into Apple. This logo, it's not a brand story, but it represents a brand story. And the truth is, and I love this, right? So a lot of you stuck like with Apple. But then some of you threw in an iPhone comment, somebody threw in a Mac, someone threw in conversations about labor practices, right? Because the thing is, while Apple does a really good job of generalizing their brand image and the story that they project, there is also elements that come out of it that we take away on our own. The truth is, based on just the people that I've seen here, right? They've done a good job. You recognize the name, you recognize who they are and what they do. You may even know a little bit more about them and their mission based on kind of where you sit and how you kind of track their business. But you know who they are. And it's actually simply by the visible representation, the logo of their brand identity. So, what about the next one? This one's fun. When you see this, what do you think? Right? We've got Gatorade. This is actually it's a brand that's owned by Pepsi, which people don't always know, and Pepsi actually very intentionally kind of keeps that separate because Gatorade has such a strong brand identity on its own. But when you think about Gatorade, what are those first things that come to mind when you think about Gatorade, the brand? I see sports drink. Yep. You guys, right? And especially as we think about the fact that the Olympic ceremonies is starting, my instinct is we're going to see lots and lots about Gatorade over the coming weeks, and they'll be everywhere. So again, this gives you that idea of a brand story. While a brand story is definitely verbal, it's content, it's written, it's talked to, but there are other things that then you tie to your brand story that resonate and help you drive awareness. I've got a last one that I think is kind of fun. So the next one, who is that? And is she a brand? Any thoughts? Any comments? Oh, and now I broke everything. So keep writing in the chat. I'm going to figure out what I did wrong here, and we will get this fixed up. I have no idea what happened here, guys. So keep talking about Taylor. Here's the thing: as I reshare my screen, the reality is Taylor is absolutely a brand. She is somebody who on her own has built a business empire that really has changed the way that we think about marketing. Oh man, I have no idea what's happening here, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm going to close these things out and then start from scratch. Here we go. I apologize, and I thank your patience. This is not normally how this goes. Okay, so let's talk about this again. So when you think about Taylor, Taylor has created a path all on her own, right? She is somebody who was in a situation that she felt was less than fair, and ultimately recreated herself using her own personal products, her songs, refilming those, and ultimately has now gone on to become a billionaire tour master with videos and a cute football boyfriend. But everybody, regardless of you like her music or not, know who Taylor Swift is, and no one can say that she is not a businesswoman, because she really has done all that she can to really capitalize on the brand that she has built on her own. So we think about this, and again, you can see here, and it doesn't necessarily potentially truly connect as a story, but you can see the physical representation and building brand stories that are strong and really resonate, and how that then drives awareness and drives connection to your brand or others' brands. I actually want to start in this next thing. I'm going to play a video. It's 1 minute long. I'm going to let it play for the minute, and then I'll talk a little bit about why we're talking about it.
The legend was born. Born in 1965 in the storied swamp of Florida. And as befits a legend, it began with a steering question. Coach asked why we didn't go during the game. The players weren't adequately hydrated and their performance suffered. As the Gators marched through the season, they drank a carbohydrate electrolyte beverage created by University of Florida doctors.
Naturally, we called our stuff Gatorade.
In conditions that would make a salamander sweat, the Gators thrive.
Those boys drank that stuff and they became a second half team. I saw it with my own two eyes.
In 1967, when the Gators won their first Orange Bowl, Gatorade had arrived.
Today, Gatorade is the most researched sports drink in the world.
And it continues to fuel champions wherever they're found. Humbly born on the hard-scrabbled gridirons of Florida, proven by generations of athletes. And just as the games never end, so the legend continues. The legend was...
So the reason I showed that video, and I'm hoping you guys heard the sound, is that ad is from, I believe, 1994. And the brand team, when they developed that ad, they were starting to see competitors in the sports kind of drink space. It was when Powerade started coming into play and other alternatives. And they wanted to reinforce the credibility of their product and tie to the history of the fact that it really was the first of its kind, and that there was a history there that counted for something in a highly competitive market. And so what you see is, again, as I talk about brand stories, it's this interconnection of your history, what you stand for, what you're trying to accomplish, or what your product is trying to accomplish, and why that should matter to the end audience that you're talking to, that leads to an incredibly effective brand story. So now, as we might kind of think about that, I've kind of outlined here, and you'll see that we dropped in the chat at the very beginning, and if we can drop it one more time in case people came in later, I created a 2-page worksheet in PDF that all of you can download, and it allows you to kind of have the summary of this deck, as well as a page where you can put in your own thoughts as we go through this on how you might want to build your brand story in the second page, which is a worksheet. So when we talk about brand stories, that Gatorade ad is actually one of the best illustrations that I have seen, honestly, in the 20 years that I've been in this space, of taking all of those key elements and clearly communicating in a way that makes sense. For this audience, it wasn't a retailer, it wasn't a sports team, it was the consumers on why they mattered. But it pulls it all together in a way that is short, right? If you think about us when we're pitching, when we're introducing ourselves to new potential clients or consumers, we don't have a lot of time. That was 1 minute long, and yet it was tight and it was clean and it was compelling. And so as we think about it, we've got to take some of these facets, and the facets may change depending on your audience, but we have to take some of these facets, and I think the big or is those elements that matter most for your business into account when doing brand stories. If you're in consumer packaged goods, right, it's going to be your product, possibly your history or your differentiating factors. If you're in professional services, it's going to look different. But at the end of the day, it's about making sure that you understand the key points that you want to get across that are going to be most compelling to persuade the end audience to ask for more information or to potentially convert into purchasing. Any links, any questions before I continue? Okay, I'm going to go with no, and I am going to go to the next slide. So look, when we talk about brand stories, it really is simple. And even if you think about that Gatorade ad that I showed, Gatorade's goal was to reinforce that they were the market leader, that they were there first, and that scientifically they had done the work to ensure that their sports drink worked. I think that got across. So the first question you have to ask yourself from a storytelling perspective is, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Whether it's a quick pitch or an introduction at a networking event, or actually going in for a sales conversation. What is your goal what are you trying to accomplish as you tell the brand story you're trying to tell? The next question, and this is the part that's really important, is who is your audience? Because your story is going to be different if you're talking to a consumer that literally you really can only reach on the shelf, because that's where your story starts to come into play from a packaging perspective. Or is it somebody you're talking to through ad or radio? Or is it somebody that you are talking to through in a one-on-one business meeting or a networking event where you have to do a pitch? So when you are building your brand stories, and again, these are going to be different based on your goal and the audience, you've got to know who you're talking to and what you're trying to accomplish. But most importantly, you've got to know what's in it for them. Because at the end of the day, whether it's business or it's personal, there's a reason why that person takes the time to listen. For us in the business world, if we want to close a sale, if we want someone to pick up a product off a shelf, we've got to give that end client or consumer the reason to do it. And that's about taking what we're trying to accomplish and transitioning it into why it matters for them. So what I was going to do next is really dig into this broader kind of element of what are some examples of brand stories that you're trying to tell. And I've listed them here. I've listed a couple, right? You may be a new company and you just want people to know who you are. The truth is, for any of us who have small businesses today, at any point in our professional life cycle of our company, we are trying to ensure people know our brand. It doesn't matter if we've been established for 100 years or if we're literally just getting off the ground. We need people to know who we are. So this is a brand story example that everyone needs to have kind of the story put together for how to do that. Now, when you build that brand story, you also think about the channels in which you execute, right? You can think about, how am I going to communicate this? That idea of the pitch or the networking event. If I'm doing a one-on-one with somebody I've just met, what is that 1 minute or 90-second brand story that I will tell people about what my brand does and how it does it? If you're actually a consumer packaged goods, right? Something that you're selling in a store or at a farmer's market, your brand story might actually not be something that needs to be conveyed one-on-one in a conversation, because you won't always have the chance, right? So then it's more about, how do I take the elements of my get to know me brand story and put it on packaging, so that people know who I am and where I am. There's an incredible company called Sugar Bliss, run by a woman in Chicago, and her packaging on her cookies actually does a phenomenal job of talking about her product, showing her product, but then also reinforcing that she's a woman-owned business, that the product is made in the Chicago area. And so she's communicating a locale, she's communicating things that matter to her, and she, through imagery and through kind of the different elements of messaging, is clearly communicating what her product is, so that no one has to be there to get that across. Another example might be a more technical example, right? Something like, I built a software platform, and I am a platform that let's say it does CRM, customer relationship marketing. There's lots of players out there. I want to be able to build a story that quickly can explain why I am different than a Salesforce.com, which is really expensive and actually somewhat hard to rationalize spending on if you're a smaller business. Another thing might be, and this is something for me that tends to be really important, is I want I want people to believe that I am credible as a thought leader. And so there are different ways that I do that as a larger element or facet of my bigger brand story, by doing thought leadership pieces where I talk about retail or I talk about consumers that I've surveyed. So it's one of those things where, again, there are different components of building your brand story. And just like in a book, the brand story itself has multiple chapters that are driven, again, by audience and by your goals. And so as you think about some of those brand stories that you might want to tell, is anyone brave enough to share what one type of brand story that they'd be willing to, that they would want to work on today? Is anyone willing to share that out loud? Just raise your hand, and the BACP team will actually unmute you. And it's okay if not, you can also just throw it in the chat and I'll talk about it.
Yeah, and I do want to make sure everyone has access. I've dropped the file in the chat like 3 or 4 times now. Someone said, "Can we get the link?" It's not a link, it's like a file that should be dropped in the chat. So
And if that doesn't work,
yeah,
okay,
someone
no
said no
file.
file.
Okay, if that doesn't work, guys, after this session, what you are welcome to email me, and I am happy to reply to you and send that directly to you if you can't get it through the chat.
Okay, yeah, so it's working. Looks like one person said no, but other people. All right,
Okay.
so maybe for that one person, I wonder if it's like maybe not on mobile, but if you're, on the computer, it's working. But anyways, yeah, we do have one person who raised their hand.
Okay. Go ahead and tell me if you're able to talk. Go ahead and tell me what you're thinking about for a brand story.
So I'm gonna, Janita Tucker, I'm unmuting you.
You there?
We can't hear you if you're talking.
Oh no. And again, if there's a tech issue, we've already seen that on my side. I am happy to talk offline and we can go that again. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll go again. And Janita, I am happy. You're going to get my contact information after this. So if you want to talk offline one-on-one for 30 minutes, I'd love to do that. Okay.
All right.
Perfect. So then what we talk about next is we talk about the audience. Now, I kind of queued this up a little bit earlier, but knowing who your audience is actually incredibly important in how you frame your brand story or the different chapters in your brand story. So as a perfect example, when you look at some of these, I just threw them out as a way, candidly, I like pictures. I like having visual slides. I think even telling stories visually sometimes is more effective than just having bullets and having people read. But if you're sitting there, and again, I talked about the consumer element of things. So let's say that you are selling and I'm making this up, a beauty care product to men and women. You have different lines. The story that you're going to tell to a older gentleman is different than the story that you're going to tell to a young mom. And so you've got to take into account how you want to tell the stories as it relates to why it matters to them. In the professional services space or in the broader kind of merchant space, if you have a small business, right? As you think about the audiences that you're trying to get in the door, or for professional services, the companies that you're wanting to work with, adjusting who you talk to and how you talk to them based on what you're trying to accomplish, those are chapters in your story, but still all have to be connected. So I will give you a real example in my world. When I am talking to somebody that works for a manufacturer and that they're in the insights function, so they buy marketing research, The way that I will explain to them what we do at PDG Insights is going to be technical. I'm going to talk about sample size of consumers, the length of a survey, how I survey, how I support them in building a survey. And I'll do it quickly. And there's actually specific ways that you can say all of that in the jargon of insights in just 2 or 3 words. When I'm talking to somebody in the nonprofit space where I do work, I will actually tweak it. I will position it more as marketing and communication support, because especially at mid-sized nonprofits, you've got way too much work to do and not enough people. And really, you don't have insights functions versus marketing functions versus communication functions. Whereas with big manufacturers, you do. And so when I talk about how I help people with storytelling, it really is more in helping them get their point across. And so I tweak it. I'm not doing anything different. The tools that I use and the ways that I execute it are the same, but I'm tweaking the wording in a way that is more relatable and actually relevant to the audience that I'm talking about. So if you guys feel game and want to throw in the chat, my gut is I have no idea what people do if are there audiences that you feel are unique audiences for your product or your company that you feel comfortable sharing. Feel free to throw them in the chat, and that might just get other people thinking about different ways to look at the audiences that they sell to. And I see nonprofit executives is one. Thank you so much for that. You kind of heard me with the insights. My gut is there's got to be consumers. Is anyone going straight to consumers? Awesome. Awesome. So you're talking to sober and queer consumers, an online dog boutique. So we've got pet owners there. This is awesome. So trucking business, with the trucking business, what's interesting in that logistics space is you're having to talk to people across all different industries, and the people you're working with are different. My little brother, when he got out of the Navy, actually worked for a trucking company. So I've learned a little bit about that. But this is awesome. This is perfect. Thank you. And you can see here in these examples that people put out, my gut is even not knowing what you do, I start to get an idea based on the audiences that you're talking to, some of the elements of at least the type of thing that you're talking to. That kids versus adults is huge. And whether you're in services or you're in products, knowing that kids are just as influential in the household as adults and getting them aligned is a big, big deal. I love that differentiation, because a lot of times there's a default to just, I'm talking to a parent. So awesome job, guys. Thank you. The next thing that we're going to talk about is what you need to know about your audience, right? So when I talk about think about your audience, you've got to adjust in the messaging that you tell your audience based on who they are and what you know about them. I actually kind of gave you an example of the process that I use to understand my audience based on the kind of quick data points I gave you about myself, right? So when you're talking to a potential client, or you're building messaging for a consumer, or you're trying to communicate, I see a lot of consulting, like nonprofit or business organizations out on the list here, right? You're tailoring the message to the different audiences, whether they're funders, whether they're grantees, whether they're the end people in the communities that are being impacted. You really have to adjust things by understanding who those people are. So demographics, psychographics, if you haven't heard about that, it's more about who they are as people. What are their attitudes and behaviors? Demographics are those basics: race, age, ethnicity. Do they have kids? Where do they live? Do they speak? What language do they speak when they're at home? The psychographics are they're athletes and they like sports drinks, stuff like that. You're going to care about the behaviors related to your company or brand, right? In the consumer space, a lot of that might be how do they buy products in my category? In my space, it's how do they buy professional services? How is their organization structured in deciding who buys what for insights? In the nonprofit space, actually, it really can be different depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And how you try to understand what that is. You always want to think about the competitors. And candidly, that market assessment of who you are competing against tends to be one of the most valuable ways to assess the type of messaging that you want to think about, and ultimately determine if you can position yourself in the competitive landscape in a more effective way to show that you're differentiated. But you also need to know the alternatives, right? In my space, in the marketing research space, people can invest in working with a small consultancy like mine. They can work with really large consultancies if they have the budgets. But the truth is, there are 100 different ways to do your own survey with your own audience and find that it's good enough for you. And that's free. It's just your time. And so when I actually sit and think through things, I always have to take into account, based on the size of the organization, the reality is if I'm working with a small emerging brand or a nonprofit, and I feel they can be effective in just using their own email list and sending a Google survey or a SurveyMonkey survey, I'm actually going to tell them that because I feel like that's in their best interest. Now, that's not how everyone operates, but for me, in part because of how I've structured my business and my goals for my business, at the end of the day, my goal is about helping people get access to the information that allows them to make better decisions. But I take that into account when I do it. So when you think about those audiences that you put out in the system, right, whether you're doing it on your own or not, whether you're doing it intentionally or not, you actually are taking into account, I bet, a lot of these things, but you also might be aware, hey, I don't know. And that's where, when you can't figure out who you want to target and message, that's where you start to then consider, is it time to ask for help or talk to somebody, talk to an expert in that space? So as we continue on, that question about what is in it for me, and when I say what is in it for me, I'm talking about the person who is hearing your brand story or that chapter in your brand story. What you've got to consider is, what problems are you trying to solve for the audience, right? Is there something where they have a need and you can fill that need, and you can fill it in an effective manner and in a way that's different than the competition? You have to take into account the investment that they might have to make. I made that example I talked about the CRM systems, right? For a lot of small businesses, paying $100 a month for a CRM system might not be feasible. So if you've got a solution that's less expensive and you can articulate why $50 is worth it, but 100 might be too much, you talk about that. You need to proactively think about the risks and what those alternatives are that we've already talked about, right? The risks, right? Risk could be small. Like, they could literally be, you've created a new, and I will fully admit, I have 3 teenagers and ultimately I'm constantly buying groceries. So a lot of my examples, not only because I grew up in consumer packaged good, but because I am constantly grocery shopping, I think about food first. But like, let's say that you have created this awesome organic granola bar that's catering towards teens. What are the risks if someone were to buy your product? Well, probably, unless there's an allergen, they're safe. Like, it's not a big risk. You spent the money and you might not like it. But if you're investing in software, or if you're investing in a consulting project and the results don't go where you want, or you have a bad experience with that consultant, there is real money implications. And so you have to understand that for someone to buy from you and trust you and listen and learn from your brand story, they're actually saying, I recognize there's risks, but I believe enough in you that I'm not going to be in a bad spot at the end of this. And so you've just kind of got to think through those different pieces as you think about what you want to say and how you want to say it. So a big part of this is this idea of how do you get different data points? I've given you some examples about the demographics. Telling data-driven stories, being able to quantify the value that you can provide. It can be done in big ways or it can be done in small ways. So in kind of that retail space where you have huge stores with survey data and purchase data, it can be it can be very easy to tell a data-driven brand story using survey data. So perfect example would be, I did some research a while ago, and it was for a company, and it was a company that is actually launching they're in the sustainability space, and they want to reduce plastic waste. And so they've created this water filtration system for offices and gyms and candidly anywhere big where there's big groups where people can literally either bring their own bottles or use bottles that are cleaned within the machine there. And they wanted to understand, candidly, do people even like this idea? Or post-COVID, is the idea of having a single place where I keep putting water bottles and different people have water bottles, is that going to freak people out? And we had a quick survey, and ultimately what we found is that particularly among millennials, they loved the idea of reducing plastic waste. They loved the idea of being able to use their own bottles. But what was more interesting to them is if that company potentially added flavors where they could actually get flavored water from a water machine instead of having to buy the cans of sparkling water, and being able to pick between still water and sparkling water was a big deal. And so that company actually took that data and built a brand story, and then started going out to different offices that really skewed younger, agencies, technology firms, things like that, and use that to help build their case for why their product was something that the company could consider. If you're not in that sales space, right? One of the things that we in this business space, we talk about reviews, we talk about social media posts, we talk about influencers. Anything that's out there in the public domain is a data point that you can use to tell your story. You can literally take somebody's Instagram post, as long as you kind of shared, if it's public, like you can talk about how people are talking about how good your product is. I mean, we all know, for those of you on Amazon, I don't know about you, but I definitely look at ratings on Amazon as a way to decide what I want. I look at Yelp when I'm trying to pick a new place to go, or Google reviews. Even if with going to a dentist, if I need to find a new dentist because mine retired, I start by looking at data points, and capitalizing on those data points to reinforce your credibility is never a bad thing. You can also just talk to your people, whether it's consumers that are visiting your store or going to your museum, if it's your clients, if it's individuals that you're trying to sell to, talking to them and understanding what they want. Those are all types of data, qualitative versus quantitative, that allow you to bring in real elements of the people you're trying to reach into your story to be more effective. And the truth is, this leans into kind of numbers and formal ways at getting information, but there are informal data points, right? Doing quick competitive assessments, whether you do them in a big fancy way or you just look around at who your competition is. Leaning into benchmarks, if that's something. If in the technology space, talking about how often you update your technology to keep it up current and add new benefits. Talking about the percent of people with your software and how often they use you. If you're a gym, a fitness facility, and you say, hey, we have people come 4 days a week, and that's more than most other gyms because they like what we do. Those are all types of data points that you can use, even if they don't initially feel like a data point, to tell better stories. Pictures and video is data. And that's actually one of the things that I think, depending on what space you're in, is if you're in kind of the food service space, in the retail space, if you're a consumer packaged good, having pictures and videos talking about you, like the Gatorade ad, actually are ways to get your data story out there. And the truth is, for each of you, depending on where you are, there is a ton of different types of data that you have that you may not even realize you have, that you can use as ways to make your story more compelling. So I'm going to pause. Any questions here? Sounds like Bevy. It is not Bevy, the example, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and it is similar. Other than a Google search, what are tools to find what is public domain recommendation? Okay, I can tell you, and I'm not like, I am not a lawyer, but Google reviews, Yelp reviews, the stars on Amazon, like all of those things that are literally visibly public, like you could say my average Yelp review is 4.9, or like those are ways you could tap into it. You could quote the different things and materials. So if somebody has published something on a Google or a Yelp or an Amazon and it's a really good review, those are things that you can quote. There are more sophisticated tools that you can pay for. It depends on where your business is, whether I would ever recommend you do that or not. I've really only seen those tools really support really, really big brands that then have insights teams that transition that. But there's other ways where it sounds really simple, and I'll actually show you a quick generative AI study that I've done. One of the things that you could do is if you're in a place where you are getting reviewed, whether it's Amazon or it's Yelp or it's Google reviews, or there are other places within your industry, you can actually copy and paste those things that have been published, and you could actually throw them. You could ask your generative AI tool, whether you're talking about Gemini or ChatGPT, or now Copilot from Microsoft, which integrates ChatGPT. You could actually take those reviews and ask that generative AI to give you the key themes that come out of the reviews. And like, you'll find that it highlights keywords or ideas and gives you a summary of the reviews that you might be able to find. Like, let's say that you're a woman's apparel boutique, and when people review you, they talk about the awesome assortment or the cool local provide, and you'll like be able to pull out some of those themes as things to throw in marketing as well. Any other questions? And I'm trying to leave time at the end if anyone just wants to talk through an example brand story. But I'm trying to be cognizant of time as we continue. So ironically, that feeds right into the conversation about generative AI. So I am going to tell you outright, I love generative AI as a tool, but the truth is none of it works without you. The results that you will get are going to be as good as the questions you ask, but also everything you get needs to have a logic check as an expert in the space to evaluate how to do it. So with generative AI in storytelling, you literally, and I'm not joking, if someone wants to play along on their computer, go into one of these the ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini and ask a simple question like, put in your company and what you do and ask it to give you a 3-sentence brand pitch or brand story. And it won't be perfect, but you'll get something that's respectable based on the information you give it. Now, the truth is, the more information that you give it, the closer it's going to be to something that's interesting. Yes, Pew Research is phenomenal if you're looking for data and trends and facts. And there's a ton of those. One of the biggest things on that, and that's an offshoot, is right now, depending on what field you're in, there are so many companies out there putting out white papers and free content as a way to drive thought leadership. You would be amazed with what you can find. And to lean into that, the truth is, and Emily, you didn't mean to, but you set me up perfectly. That is actually for me, when I am writing a survey for a client, or I'm doing survey work for myself for thought leadership, I actually will start with, tell me what's already out there. So I did this, it's a print screen. I was doing a survey on the private label consumer, so store brands. And I wanted to make sure that I had a gauge of what companies were already doing research in this space and what was being published. And so you can't see the whole thing here, but I said, provide a profile of the private label consumer. It gave me literally a full multiple paragraph summary with themes. And then I asked it to tell me the sources, and it gave me links to the white papers that it was pulling from that let me then go see what was out there and what questions had already been asked that were in the public domain. That helped me build a survey for myself that was either digging into areas that I thought were more interesting, or where I actually was able to kind of come up with places where I felt that there was a void in knowledge in the public domain that people might benefit from. And those are kind of some of the ways that I'd used this before. And so with that Pew Research piece, that's one of those things where, depending on your audience, this is a really good way. AI is artificial intelligence. Generative AI, there are free websites. One is, it's gemini.google.com, that is run by Google. ChatGPT.com is another one, and really one of the first ones to break through. And then Microsoft Copilot is actually something that on your own computer, actually sometimes you will get a little prompt because they're piloting now this idea of generative AI. And what it is ultimately it's structured where what you see is you go to a website and there's literally just a, like, what looks like a search bar, and you ask the system a question and it answers your question. Now, it is, again, it's a starting point. It's not accurate 100% of the time, but right now in the marketing space, and in the marketing space, you have a lot of people using AI as a way to start marketing strategy plans, to potentially give them ideas on things to put out on social media. It can actually help you kickstart blogs for your website. And that's, I mean, candidly, that's an entirely, I could do an entire session just on generative AI. It is a powerful tool, and it actually can be very helpful, but you have to be, when you're using it, you've got to know what to keep an eye out for in kind of understanding where it's pulling the information and what it's saying. So the example you can see just here on my print screen is, it gave me these statistics that it found online somewhere. And if I hadn't asked where it was coming from, if someone used this, it's been a random fact that could be wrong. And so you always want to then where the data points are coming from to make sure they're coming from credible sources. So that's that. And we can, I'll kind of have, if anyone has further questions, we can talk about that later. Here's where we're going to catch up. We're at about 11:25. I wanted to do a couple case studies. So what I've done here in this first case study is I have given you a couple data points. Some are true, some are not, and I will fully admit this. I don't work with this client. It's honestly just it's a brand that is local to the Chicagoland area that I've always been intrigued by. And I actually really do like how they market their products. And so I thought it might be a fun example of a case study to show you how companies can use the different elements of who they are and their brand history and tie that into driving awareness about their brand. So in this case, this is a barbecue sauce and rubs. That is literally an old favorite recipe. The owners are actually very visible on their Instagram page about the barbecuing contests and smokeouts that they go to across the country. They did get distribution at Mariano's in the Chicagoland area. I've seen it on the shelf. And then there's just a couple other elements that I threw in of things that they as a brand would know about themselves. So now this is actually a question. Feel free to throw it in the chat. When you think about the different things that I've laid out here, plus what you see on their packaging, if you were to write a quick brand story that focused on two elements of what you know based just what I've shared here, what would you do? What would you highlight in building a brand story to drive awareness about them? Go ahead and throw it in the chat. Cool. I like this. Local and sustainability. Yes. That definitely is one way to go. Anybody else brave enough to put some thoughts in here? Okay. Outside of Chicago. Yeah. Very good. That's a good one. So I'm seeing a few more. I'll give it a few more minutes. Yeah. Yeah. I like this. Thank you guys for playing along with me on this. This is really okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining while you could. I appreciate it. Awesome. Okay. So here's the deal. Part of why I did this is also because we can tap in. We can see what they've done, right? So what they have done, this is a small brand, right? We know they're on Kroger, but they really are at Mariano's, but they really can only use their packaging to tell their story. Websites are where, for a lot of small brands, we have the most power to control our brand story. And they lean into their websites. And as I mentioned, they lean into social media as a way to communicate who they are and what they're trying to accomplish. And for them, they've really leaned into the history of their brand. If you kind of dig on the website, the recipe for this barbecue sauce, it's like the 6th generation of the family is now running this. And the great grandfather who started this literally created this recipe while he was a slave. And when, after the Civil War, moved up, I think, to the Missouri area, and then ultimately the family from there, like, they did this as a side hustle, and then slowly over time, they built it into a brand that they are co-packaging here in the area. And they tied into that history and that family connection as a way to honestly build personal connections with people. But then in addition, one of the things that they lean into is they lean into social media, and they're award winning. Like, the sauces have won big awards in different places. It's going to sound terrible, but as a Texan, I'm anti barbecue sauce because Texans don't always eat barbecue sauce, but I actually love their barbecue sauce on chicken, which is the place that I grew up in. But, like, with that said, like, they have leaned into this and really built a compelling story. And I actually learned about the brand in part because, right now it really is, it's the family that runs it. The dad he actually has a full-time job. This is his side hustle, and he has the kids involved in selling at farmers markets and doing it. And it really is a brand of the Chicagoland community, even though it originated in the Missouri area. But now they're here, and this is home. But this is truly their family. This is their family pictures, and it makes it different. If I have to choose between Kraft or Old Arthur's, I will default to something like Old Arthur's because it feels like, I just feel like it's going to taste better because it's a smaller brand and they're focused on quality in different ways. And I also I feel like it's unique. So this is just one way that people tell their brand story. I did another, and again, I lean into food partly because I've spent 20 years in consumer packaged goods. So I know how to tell these stories a little faster, but also just because I'm buying groceries all the time. 2 teenage boys can eat a lot. With that said, this is an example of taking a consumer packaged good, and rather than communicating with the consumer, you're trying to talk to a merchant and get yourself on shelf. And Magic Spoon is a cereal brand that's relatively new to the space. It's a really crowded category. And so I kind of laid out here some data points. Again, some are made up, some are real, about potentially this company's founder trying to get Magic Spoon on the shelf in Costco. Because Costco, as a national retailer, is an incredibly strong national retailer. And so being able to get one SKU in at a Costco has huge implications for a small manufacturer. So as you look at kind of some of the things I've laid out here, to tell this story to a large national retailer, you literally could tell it 20 different ways. I've kind of modeled out 2 different examples. So the first example is, it's straightforward. Americans are eating gluten-free now, and retailers are selling gluten-free options. Costco should be selling a gluten-free cereal, and Magic Spoon is in grocery stores now. Sold at Target, it's sold at Jewel, it's sold in a lot of places. So Costco, you don't have a gluten-free cereal, and Americans are eating more gluten-free cereal or more gluten-free products. So Costco, you should sell Magic Spoon to fill that void. That story, because it is, again, we talk about the different chapter. This is a sales chapter versus a marketing chapter, but that story is a valid story to tell. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that story. But if you try it just a little bit differently, and this is where the data points come into play, 1 out of 4 people in the US population today eats gluten-free cereal. That is actually something I looked up. That is a true fact. Costco has, let's say in their investors call, they actually stated that they want to make gluten-free products a priority in 2025. So they are focusing on increasing assortment of gluten-free products in 2025. This I made up. I don't know if it's true. It wouldn't surprise me, but like these are those elements of when you do the research about who your audience is, who you're talking to. If you were going into a major retailer or corporation, you might start by listening to an investor's call or kind of seeing what their senior leadership is talking about priorities. Now, Costco does not have a gluten-free cereal. That is something that actually, again, I don't know if it was true. If I were Magic Spoon, I would find out by walking into a Costco and seeing what their assortment looks like. And then you tap into your own data. Here, Magic Spoon knows their sales data. So they would know that they've grown significantly where they have assortment, and you bring that into play because then you're also kind of creating this competitive element. Costco, this is growing in grocery. You should be carrying it in wholesale. And then this is where you use survey work to understand the end target for Costco and for Magic Spoon. At the end of the day, it's about the consumers buying this product and making it a success. And so let's say Magic Spoon did a quick 5-minute survey and ultimately just said, you know, do you buy, like, are you aware of these cereal brands? Do you buy the brands that you're aware of? And you find out that 5% of the people buy Magic Spoon. Well, do you have a Costco membership? You've literally just flipped this on why it matters to Costco. Well, Costco, did you know that half of Magic Spoon shoppers today have a Costco membership? And if Magic Spoon isn't available at your stores, they're buying it elsewhere, which means they're taking that grocery business elsewhere. Is that something you want? And so then you end it with this idea of filling the gap, right? You've proven that there is a market. You've proven that Costco has a gap, or at least you think they have a gap based on their own priorities. You've proven that you have succeeded in selling in the similar environments that are competitive to Costco. And you've proven that your brand shopper is also their brand shopper. So your brand is, in theory, the right brand for Costco to carry. So that is kind of that nuance between a general brand story and a data-driven brand story that ultimately I would argue would likely be more successful at getting you what you want by reinforcing to the Costco buyer that you know what they care about, and thus you're creating a way to solve a problem for them. Okay, I've got a few chats. Any questions? Yep. Look at this. I see this. I love this. Yes. Another Chicago gluten-free product in Costco, Simple Mills. Yes. Yes. And it's a way you can flip it, right? You've got Simple Mills. How do we get it in commercial grocers? It's also a way to get like some of these local brands in smaller stores as a way of differentiation. This is I actually just came out of field with a thought leadership piece that I'm about to start publishing about shopping local brands and retailers. And this is something that consumers across the country say they want to shop at retailers that support local brands. And so as you go to smaller independents, depending on how you're selling, and this is where I'm getting nerdy, so I will stop. But again, being able to tie in to the places where you can differentiate really, really makes a difference. I love all of this. Yes. Any questions? Okay, hold on. Yes, yes. Can we drop the file again? Otherwise, we can, Emily, when I share my contact info, you are welcome to just email me directly. Okay, so I am actually kind of, and I'm ending early. I know I had more time. I wanted to kind of save some time. I was actually a little short in purpose in case people had questions at the end. Look, I've taken you through the basics. The truth is I could spend a whole day workshopping this with companies. There's so much that you can tackle, and some of it really would be tailored depending on what your company is and what you do. But as you do this on your own at home, whether you use the worksheet that we kind of are sharing here, or you're just jotting it down on a whiteboard or on your notepad, you've got to remember that as you build your brand story book, each chapter that you build needs to be tailored to the audience that you're talking to and driven by the goals that you're trying to accomplish and tying that to why it matters to each audience. Focus on data that's relevant when you have access to it. And believe it or not, you're going to have access to a lot more data, I think, than you even realize, regardless of what type of business you are and how big or small you are. And then when you're using data, I said keep it sourced. What I mean here, it's not literally like, I got this piece of information from Amazon, or I got this piece of information in the CPG world from Nielsen. It's more about, for you, when you're telling that story, you've got to know that if you use data, that it's coming from a credible source. And you've got to know if somebody asks you where it comes from, you're able to bring that in. That's really what I mean, and keep it sourced. Keep the story simple. We can make things really complex. And honestly, for those of us, especially if we're talking about our own companies or brands, we're passionate about it. We love what we do. Trust me, I've caught myself so many times just getting completely caught up in talking about me and losing people because I've spent 10 minutes talking about PDG insights versus just one, and then stopping and then better understanding what they do. And that's something that as you tell stories, if you focus from the very beginning on keeping them simple, it actually helps keep you in check, especially if you're somebody that tends to sometimes get excited about stuff. And have fun. The whole thing with all of these stories is, at the end of the day, this is about driving your business or your brand, which is something that you're passionate about. It shouldn't be painful. It should be something fun for you. And if it's fun for you, if it's compelling to you, it likely will be compelling to who you're trying to talk to. So with that said, we're a little early, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Or if anyone has thoughts or anything they want to share, feel free to drop in. Okay. And then here, I think I just saw something come up. I will let the BACPT dig into there. I'm happy to help with that. There's also lots of other people. I am happy to answer anything on AI. I'm not an expert. I'm more of a user, but it's something that I can definitely at least share how I've used it in practical applications. My contact information is here. My LinkedIn information is here. I have put this in here because I welcome your reach outs. I am happy for anyone. I've seen some real examples here. If someone wants to spend 30 minutes just to talk through, I'm not going to be able to maybe solve everything if they're more complex in 30 minutes. But again, I launched this company with the goal of helping both small and big companies, but really in being accessible to help smaller businesses in ways one-on-one where I can. So feel free to email me, feel free to LinkedIn me. And I'm just so grateful for the time that you guys gave, and I really enjoyed doing this.
Yeah, great. There's thank you very much, Deanna. There's lots of thank yous. Some people were asking for your contact, so I see that now that's on the screen. And yeah, I think we will, yeah, thank you, thank you. But yeah, I think we can end it here. Everyone, we'll give it a few more seconds to get down that email. Deanna at pdginsights.com. scan the QR code. All right, and we'll end it there. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful Friday, everybody.
Thank you.